reading of the Electoral Referendum Bill on the basis that the legislation has been improved through the Select Committee process and the input of the more than 1,000 people who submitted to the committee, especially the 50 or so who submitted in person. Again, can I place on record the approach adopted by the Chair of the Committee, Amy Adams, and also the Minister, who enabled us to reach a compromise that enabled us to support the bill. In this bill, again, the major sticking point was the need for a cap on third-party spending, believing as we did that without the cap, the potential for advertising to distort the campaign by the well-resourced anti-MMP group, largely made up of corporates, over the under-resourced pro-MMP group, largely made up of community groups, was too great. Mr. Speaker, I've made much about two issues during the course of the debate. I believe that this is a citizens-initiated referendum masquerading as a government referendum. And secondly, I believe that there is a strategy in place to replace MMP with a form of first-past-the-post with 30 supplementary list members who are voted on separately with a party vote that is proportional only to those 30 members. Part of this strategy is to ignore the public demands for changes to some aspects of MMP before subjecting it to a referendum. I am firmly of the view that if the government truly wanted to test public opinion about MMP, they would have allowed that review to precede the first referendum. But they didn't allow time for that, which makes the need to review MMP post the referendum even more imperative, regardless of the outcome of the first referendum. My amendment, which was rejected by the government, was designed to achieve that. Mr. Speaker, if a second referendum is required, and I doubt that the public will fall for the strategy, but just in case they do, then allowing MMP to run up against a brand new purpose-designed system without any review of its flaws would mean the second referendum would lack integrity. That is why Labor will commit to the review regardless of the outcome of the referendum, and if a second referendum is required, we will commit to the timetable proposed by this government and hold that in 2014, but the MMP system it will run up against will have been reviewed so the public will get a real say, a real choice. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the government's position that people need to vote on the system they are used to is spurious, because they could also at the same time be voting on a system they have never experienced on the other side of the MMP debate. New Zealanders want us to revisit the thresholds, and that we must do. There are other aspects of MMP that must be reviewed. So why are we having a referendum on MMP anyway? The announcement was made by John Key at his party conference leading up to the 2008 general election. It was number 10 on the list of 10 pledges he released that day, but I always felt that it was the pledge that certain interests had wanted since the 2005 campaign had gone so horribly wrong for National at the last minute. And this is where there is a link between this bill and the previous bill. Business interests and groups like the Exclusive Brethren had poured millions of dollars into that campaign, first through the divisive billboards that dominated the landscape from the beginning of the year to avoid the electoral spending caps, and to set the scene for a misogynist and racist campaign, remembering, of course, the iwi kiwi and the distorted photographs. National was supposed to win that campaign, with Dom Brash positioned to deliver to his backers everything they had hoped for: privatisation of our remaining asset base, relaxing rules on overseas ownership of land, making funding from vote, health, education and housing currently dedicated to the public systems fully contestable with the private housing sector.
Sorry to interrupt the member, but I'm not going to have a cross-debate going on while the member is speaking. We do tolerate a few interjections, but we're getting an interchange going on that's quite separate from the debate. Leanne Dalziel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll just recap on what Don Brash was positioned to deliver: privatisation of our remaining asset base, relaxing rules on the overseas ownership of land, making funding from vote, health, education and housing currently dedicated to the public systems fully contestable with the private sector. Market rents would be back for what little remained of the public housing stock. ACC would be replaced with private insurance. It would have been Ruth Richardson on speed. Mr Speaker, you can see why National's backers were appalled by Helen Clark's ability to put together a series of arrangements that prevented National from taking office, and they blamed MMP. Roll on John Key in the lead up to the 2008 election, and here is the quote from the coverage of the announcement, because I think it speaks volumes about why we're having this referendum. Mr Key, who made the referendum one of 10 election pledges in his speech to National's annual conference today, said he believed voters would reject MMP. I think the country may well vote MMP out, but I think they will vote in another proportional system, he told reporters. He knows what is coming. I don't think they'll go back to first past the post. He knew exactly what was on offer. But after 12 years of MMP, it was important to give voters a choice, he said. I do think voters thought they were going to get an opportunity to kick the tyres, and we're giving them that opportunity. Now, that announcement set off alarm bells for me. First, there has been a view quite widespread that people were promised a second referendum after MMP had been in for a while. In fact, it was a review that was promised, and it was promised by a national government. It wasn't promised by a Labour government. It was promised by the party that brought the MMP referendum into effect. And that review occurred after the 1999 election when we were in government. It was chaired by the Right Honourable Jonathan Hunt as the Speaker of the House, and all parties were represented on that review. Personally, I think that approach was inadequate. Personally, I think we should have had an independent review of this take place, and I think that would have given us some further grounds for making changes to MMP, which I think we could have considered 12 years into the new system. However, there were those who continued to make mischief with the view that a second referendum had been promised, and, well, quite frankly, if you keep saying things often enough, people start to think they were promised something, and that's exactly what happened. And guess who didn't deliver on this false expectation? Of course, it was Labour who didn't deliver on it, even though we weren't the government at the time the system was changed in the first place. So this referendum is not only drawing on that populist view around MMP, it is actually about delivering more to the backers, the opportunity to get rid of the MMP altogether and replace it with a system that kind of looks like and sounds like but isn't proportional representation. I quoted this in the committee stages, but I'm going to quote it again from Herald columnist John Armstrong. And before anyone mouths the word supplementary member, let's beware of false prophets in sheep's clothing. No doubt those wanting a return to those dark ages will seductively offer up the supplementary member system as a halfway house between first past the post and MMP. That system is in part proportional. It might look like a compromise. It is not a compromise. It is nothing short of snake oil elixir. Had last year's election been fought under that system with a parliament made up of 90 constituent seats and 30 list seats, National would have won 67 of them compared with its current 58. That party would have had an absolute majority of 14 seats with just under 45% of the vote. The Greens' current entitlement of 9 seats would have been slashed to just 2. So much for proportionality. Mr Speaker, we have achieved the limit on expenditure, which I hope limits the ability of the parallel campaigners to distort the truth about the supplementary member system. It is not proportional representation. It is not a halfway house. It is first past the post with a winner's bonus, and it is nothing more. It will do nothing for diversity in this place. It will do nothing to provide a critical check on the unbridled power unleashed by governments of both colours when absolute majorities were assured. That was what the people of New Zealand voted to reject in 1993, and as long as they are told the truth about what they are being offered, they will reject it again.